So today we are going to work and process the milk quality for best cheese making. So what are the best and simple tools that we can use in-house in order to know that the milk that we want to process into cheese is is of the best quality? Personally, I've been visiting farms, cheesemakers over the last 20 years. So I've met a fair bit of them. And I've never met any dairy farmer that told me, no, I'm sorry, my milk is not good for cheese. So you should go and find somebody else. Each time I ask for what about your milk? The most common answer is, oh, I've got beautiful milk. My milk is fantastic. My milk is great. Yeah, fine. But in a realistic way, how can we know that's true? And that's true for cheese making. Because if you consider the quality of the milk, just the color, if your milk is white, then it's a beautiful milk. Yeah, of course, you're right. But is this milk able to generate what you want in terms of milk processing, the curdling ability, the microbiological composition, the terroir, the flavor, the quality, and the potential for flavor development in cheese? Well, we need to know much more than what the milk is actually giving us. When we send milk to a laboratory, they will count, well, they will check total proteins, total fat. They will eventually check antibiotics or lactose eventually. They can do a pH, they will check the temperature, and they will check the quantity, the level of bacteria. Um, Now we have to consider straight in mind that the quality of the milk is absolutely not related to the quantity of bacteria that we have in the milk. We can have milk with very, very, very few bacteria, but being very poor cheese making quality, because that's not the main parameter, the quantity of bacteria. So we'll move with some information. You can see on the top in France, so numbers from last year, population 67 million, we have 57,000 dairy farms, and the average size of each farm is about 60 cow. So depending the literature, we find between 57 and 65. The average is about 60 cows per farm, which sounds really small according Australian standards. But what we can find as well, what we can look, is that the consumption per individual per year is 47 liters of liquid milk, but 27 kilos of cheese. And this is not mentioning all the fermented product like the butter, cream, yogurt that we eat a lot. But I just wanted to do the parallel between fluid milk, drinking milk, and the cheese. In Australia, we have a population of 25 millions with 8,500 dairy farms, with an average size of 220 cows per farm. So roughly speaking, the farms in here are 4 times bigger than in number of cows. So we have much bigger farms. We have much less dairy farms. And what we notice as well is that in here in Australia, you drink a lot of milk, more than twice more than what we do in France. But the consumption of fermented product, the cheese itself, is much lower. So in terms of quantity of product, those repartition will bring us to a two different thing. We can diversify or classify the milk into two categories: milk that is dedicated for the feed market, where mainly we have Holstein Friesian, Jersey cows. Mainly, it's what we can find in Australia. Some shorthorns, mainly bigger herds. It's very common in here to find, to see farms with 600, 800,000 cows. There is not a single farm in France that have more than 500 dairy cows. It doesn't exist. So we have mainly much smaller herds. The classic feed for food for those animals will be a lot of fermented fodders, silage, grains, of course, a lot of grass when we have enough rain. And the milk is usually processed with thermal treatment. It's standardized and homogenized um, in terms of proportion. The cheese milk, milk that is dedicated for cheese making production will look for much more diversity in cows, the breeds like Montbéliard, Normandy cows, Abondance, Tarentaise, Brown Swiss, Vosgienne. We have a big diversity of dairy cows. Most of them, they don't produce as much milk as Holstein Friesian, but this is not the target. What we want is a cheese making milk. For an idea, in France, the Tarentaise, for the Beaufort, if a cow is producing more than, I forgot the exact number, but more than 3,500 liters a year, this cow is eliminated from the herd because we consider that this cow is producing way too much milk, and this will create problems for her body when she will have to walk up the mountain in the pastures. And we are concerned that being diluted, this milk will not contribute in a good way in the cheese production. So we are selecting with the lower number of um, of, of cows. Just check the questions as well. So Carla, please discuss summer goat milk compared to autumn goat milk for semi-hard cheese production. Well, Australian summer, I bet, to autumn. So now we have a very dry and very hot weather, and this impacts very much the quality of the milk. And I'm facing it today actually with a batch of milk that we received yesterday and this morning. The milk is losing a lot the curdling capacity. So this is where we'll need to use a lot those in-house tests to understand what's going on in the milk, in the composition. And Sharon says, good news for us as we have Illawarra Aussie Red with European red lines in our cows. Well, I'm fond of the colored cow. A life in black and white, it's not my cup of tea. I much prefer the brown cows. And same for, well, the more diversities we'll have, the better for the diversity of production, the diversity of cheese that we'll make. So for the cheese milk, we'll always have smaller herds. Smaller herds will always permit a much better control of every cow, every individual. Doing a CMT, California mastitis test, for every cow once a week, that's easy when you have 50 cows. That's impossible when you have 600. So the control of the other health and the herd itself is much more complicated due to the size. And grass-fed dominant fermented feed often not allowed, like in most of the AOP, so the protected cheese in France for cheese production, they do not allow the use of silage or haylage, whatever the fermented product is not allowed for different reasons. One is the food safety. We have more risk of listeria in. Butyrex is another big problem. And then with a simple fermented food like silage, it doesn't bring the same diversity, microbial and nutritional diversity as a pasture. And milk for cheese will always have lower thermal treatment because we know that the heat treatment damages the milk and reduce the cheese making ability. Here, probably this graph this picture summarize everything. So the milk itself, so between the cow and the cheese, the milk, or the cow, sheep, and goats, the milk is the vector of everything that will be engaged, every situation, food, treatment, the animal welfare, the biodiversity, all the microbes, the microbiome, what you have around, everything will be transferred into the cheese via the milk. So the milk being the vector of everything, it's fundamental to understand that if you start with milk quality that is not ideal or optimal, how can you expect cheese to be good, considering that milk is 98% of the cheese composition? So it will contribute to 98% to the cheese quality. So be careful, be very careful with this this parameter. Milk is the vector of good things, bad things. Two questions. So do you mean the pasteurization should be done at the lowest temperature possible? Yes, and particularly for the hard and semi-hard cheese that will be more with the dominant coagulation with enzymes, or rennet mainly. So the higher the temperature, the more you damage the kappa caseins. So the more you decrease the curdling ability. So if you can, always select the lower process in terms of temperature and time. Carla is asking, could you discuss butyrics in more detail? Yeah, well, we need few days to cover this matter. But butyric is a spore-forming bacteria that is able to survive. That's coming from the soil, outside bacteria. It's coming from the soil, and when we collect, harvest hay or grass or silage, if we contaminate every kind of food or fodders with soil, we integrate butyrics, spore of butyrics into the milk. Into the food. The animal will eat it, and those bacteria, those spores of butyrics, will start to wake up and multiply in the abomasum, and then it's going to be released out of the feces, and the feces on the straw, on the beddings. When the animals lay down and ruminate, they contaminate themselves, the others, with butyrics. Butyrics will then create an external contamination. So that's always from outside to the milk. It's never from the inside. So it's always an external contamination. And those butyrics are thermal resistant bacteria. So they will survive very easily the pasteurization. Even a high process like 75 degrees for 5 minutes is not enough to kill the butyrics. And the butyrics will wake up in the cheese, and after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, they will start to multiply, and they will release some gas, like H2 gas, so the cheese will present some cracks, and off flavors, usually described as rancid, oxidized, that's linked to the butyric acid that's produced into the cheese. This problem doesn't exist much into lactic and soft cheese because the paste, the structure of the curd and the paste do not allow the gas to be stored in. So the gas is dissolved into the soft cheese. And most of the time, those cheese are too acidic to permit the development of the butyrics. So it's less a problem.
Yvonne, it's Jenny. I just think we might leave the questions to the end so we make sure you get through all the information that you've got planned there. Is it okay?
Will do.
Okay, thanks very much.
So now we have the problem that starts. So when the milk is processed and collected, of course, the milking machine being the first equipment in contact with the milk, make sure that the milking machine is good, serviced, clean, sanitized. But there is always a dirty point in the milking machine, always. So you need to know where it is, and you need to find out. Once the milk is harvested from the animals, it needs to be stored and then transported to the place where we will process it. And this is really where the problem starts. Long time ago, we were processing small volumes of milk, so we are transporting the milk in churns. Now it's getting collected by trucks, massive trucks. Well, I've been crossing on the roads massive milk trucks in Australia. It's amazing the size of those things. And there's billions of liters of milk that are moved around all the country. But now, considering those volumes, we need to make sure that the milk is stored at cold temperature, because the milk is collected every second day, every third day, depending the location of the factory. And what we know is that after 48 hours, we start to have a shift in the bacteriological population. So more than 2 days old, we start to have a dominant population of cold-loving bacteria, like Pseudomonas fluorescens, like others, and enzymes as well, like lipase. And if the milk is stored for too long at cold temperature, it will change the composition, the microbiological composition will change, but the biochemical composition as well, not mentioning the minerals. Calcium is getting lost. So the older the milk, the less interesting it is. And 48 hours is really the maximum that we should allow. In some process like Conte, it must be a maximum of 12 hours to collect. Well, the milk must be 12 hours old maximum. And in order to not impact too much the microbiological composition, the Conte industry do not allow the chilling of the milk at lower than 10 degrees Celsius. So on the farm, you're not allowed to chill the milk less than 10 degrees C, but the milk is going to be collected every 12 hours maximum. And that's mandatory to produce Conte. So the cooling and storage, like we just discussed, we have a lot of information in here, but what's important to remember is that in the small and medium using, processing within 48 hours, that's really the maximum. And then we know that we start to lose cheese making ability, like loss of colloidal calcium. So we'll have some calcium that will move from colloidal to soluble calcium. We will lose this calcium, and the calcium will create the milk stone in the milk, the bulk tank, or on the equipment, the hose, the pump. This calcium, the milk stone, is lost. We cannot use it anymore. So this will create lower yield, less yield, and weak gel. The gel, the curd will be softer. Casein denaturation, so the cheese-making proteins will be affected. It develops cold-loving, also called psychotrophic bacteria, they're responsible for coloration defects and off flavor. Remember, even if you pasteurize the milk, after you kill the Pseudomonas during the pasteurization, but you keep the enzymes that the Pseudomonas released. So you will still have some negative impact on the milk quality at the end. And degradation of fat membrane, this is mainly coming from the mechanical treatments that we do, like pumping, transfer of cold milk. The cold milk makes the fat being more solid, more viscous. So the pumping of this solid fat will damage it much more. So we'll have damage of the fat membranes, and this damage will permit some natural enzymes in the milk, like LPL, lipoprotein lipase, to start to damage the fat, giving off flavor, soapy, fishy, metallic, rancid taste in the milk, but also later on in the cheese during aging. Pumps, the transfer of the milk, ideally you should do it by gravity. So this is great. In an ideal world, we do it by gravity, but when we cannot do it, we have to find another way to transfer it. And the most common way is to use a pump. The classic pump to be used in this case is a centrifuge pump. That's the most common. We have some positive displacement also that works well, but they are much more expensive. The centrifuge pump, one parameter that you need to be careful is the speed of it. If it's too strong, you will smash the milk, and this will damage the fat membranes even more. You can see on the bottom right here, the milk that is being pumped out to fill the vat, and the milk is jumping and smashing on the bottom in the milk. And just by doing that, we can see that there is a lot of froth, and the froth is really the sign of damaged fat that you have on the surface of the milk. So this froth, just this fact of having the milk being mechanically or physically damaged, will reduce the cheese making ability. You lose yield, you lose fat, but also you will create off flavors and potential for bigger problem during aging. Just turn the small elbow in here so that the milk can run smoothly on the wall of the vat to allow much less mechanical shocks. Small things, but that means a lot. Then, as a cheesemaker, when we finally get the milk into the factory, what we can do in-house to permit us to know, to have a better overview of the milk quality. The first one, well, of course, milk from sick animals, colostrum, or antibiotic residues cannot be allowed in cheese production. Traces of ATBQ antibiotics can seriously prevent lactic starter development, limiting acidification. So that's a massive loss of milk for big factories. When you have a little bit of antibiotics in, that's the whole tank, the whole truck that is discarded. Small units, most of the time we work, either we produce our own milk or we work with a limited number of farms, so that's much easier to control. If you are organic, collecting milk from an organic farm like us, this problem disappears. The first real test that you can do is the smell and taste. Just smell on top of the bulk tank or on top of the pasteurizer if you have a batch pasteurizer, to see what it smells like. And a suspicious smell or taste immediately warns the cheesemaker, telling that there is a problem with the milk. They often result from cold chain breakdown during storage, like vinegar being more a coliform defect, sour or yogurty being more a lactic acid bacteria overdevelopment during storage and transport. Bread, you will have a yeast problem, ripe fruit as well. It's a yeast development, a yeast contamination. You can have also the smell of potato, rotten potato. And in this case, that's a massive development of Pseudomonas, cold-loving bacteria. Each time you have a suspicious smell, that's not a good sign, whatever the smell, right? Even if it's a development like in here, we have a sour or yogurt, development of good bacteria, lactic acid bacteria potentially. Well, we can think, oh, that's good, that's cool. We already developed some lactic acid bacteria in the milk, so that's great. I will limit the quantity of starter culture that I use. Well, we have to pasteurize in Australia. And if you start to pasteurize milk that is already acidic, it will coagulate in the pasteurizer. So that's one of the fundamental parameters to check in the milk first. What's the pH or what's the TA? But we'll go back to this point at the end. A milk that is too acidic shouldn't be heat treated, or you should do the hot taste. You just boil 1 liter of milk into a saucepan and see if it coagulates. If it does coagulate in the pan, it will coagulate in the pasteurizer. If it's a plate pasteurizer, HTST, good luck to clean the pasteurizer after when it has coagulated and burnt inside the pasteurizer. That's a disaster. So the smell and taste will always be, that's the easiest and fastest way to start to analyze the milk. One smell that can be often found is a cauliflower, cabbagey kind of smell. It's when the animals have been eating some cruciferous family like rapeseed or wild cabbage, the smell will go directly into the milk. You will smell this cauliflower cabbagey smell into the milk. And another one that is very easy to distinguish as well is the silage. When the silage is distributed just short time before milking, will have the transfer of smell of organic volatile compounds directly into the milk. So ideally, when some cheesemakers, I know some cheesemakers that when they feed silage, they discard the silage at least half an hour before milking, so to remove those volatile compounds. And the silage smell in the milk is distinctive, and some people are very sensitive to that, and I don't like it at all, and others don't care. We don't smell it or don't find it. So taste and smell. The second test is called the resazurine test. So resazurine here is a small pill that you put into the milk at ambient temperature, and it it changes color, so it turns from blue to transparent, depending the load of bacteria that we have in the milk. It used the oxygen reaction. The more bacteria, the more it sucks out the oxygen, and it reduces the product. So it turns from blue, it turns transparent. According the speed, the time needed to become transparent, we can have an idea of the quantity of bacteria that we have in the milk. Like if it takes less than 20 minutes, it's very fast. We can estimate that we have more than 10 million bacteria per milliliter. It's very high loads. Ideally, we should be between this line, between 4 and 5 hours and over 7 hours. 50,000 bacteria per milliliter. For me, it's not a bad sign at all. It's also considered as a poor milk, not in terms of quality, but in terms of quantity. So this means that this milk will require some starter culture inoculation. Some factory and cheese making operation like Beaufort, they're still working with this system. They have a target for the milk. So after milking, we should discolor in more than 5 hours. So this indicates a load of less than 100,000 colony forming units, so bacteria per milliliter. And then just at renetting, when we want to renet, there is a rule of thumb in cheese making is we need to have at least 1 million bacteria per milliliter in order to be able to acidify fast enough. So it means that we let this milk mature, and then when the quantity of bacteria will be big enough, 1 million per milliliter, then we can renet. So this is the oldest way to assess the quantity of bacteria that we have in the milk. It doesn't say if it's good or bad, but if we have a lot of bacteria, traditionally, we used to have a lot more positive bacteria than negative bacteria, which is not very much the case in here now. Now, if we take a raw milk from the farm, and we just let it mature and incubate on its own, we have big risk of developing Pseudomonas, coliforms, and staph. So those are the 3 dominant bacteria that we'll find in the milk, and those ones will take over the development. 50 years ago, we used to have a lot more lactic acid bacteria. Now the population was very dominant in lactic acid bacteria a few years ago. Now it's not the case anymore. So just thinking that, I take my milk and I let it incubate on its own, and I will create a bulk starter with enough lactic acid bacteria, it can work, but it's like playing the Russian roulette with 5 bullets in the magazine of 6. So it can work if you're lucky. Next trial. So Resazurin, I don't know if we can find those pills in Australia. I've got some in the school in here, so we'll be using them when we'll do trainings to understand how it works. But that's something that's easy to find in Europe. I'm not sure if we can find it easily in Australia. I need to investigate that. Next step, lacto-fermentation test. So this is the simplest and cheapest way to understand quantity of bacteria, quantity of lactic acid bacteria, and the type, the quality of bacteria. Ideally, we do this test once a week, if doable. It's always easy to say because we are always running after time. But what we want to know in this milk is, do we have acidification potential? And if you use raw milk, this will tell you if you need to use a lot of starter culture or not. In here in Australia, if you do the lacto-fermentation on a pasteurized milk, this will tell you if the pasteurization procedure is efficient or not. If the milk moves being pasteurized, it means that probably your pasteurization process is not good enough for the quality of the milk that you start with. And we'll have some ideas about the dominant flora that we have in the milk, being positive or negative. So the procedure is very easy. In 6 glass tubes, test tubes, 20 milliliters, you bring the milk to be tested to the temperature used in cheese making process. If you make lactic type of cheese, you need to check the milk at 22 about. If you make soft cheese, it's going to be 34. If you make hard cooked cheese, in this case, ideally, you need to mimic the heating cycle. So you start during 2 hours at 30 degrees, then you cook it up to, let's say, 45 in a bain-marie, and then you let it cool down on its own, just to mimic the milk or the gel when you make cheese with it. And then in the milk, you will separate those tubes into 2 sets, one just the milk, the other one with a tiny bit of rennet. I just say very tiny because in here the rennet, the most common rennet that we find is very concentrated, is more concentrated than the standard rennet in France. So if you don't know, you just dilute the rennet that you have at least by 10, 1 milliliter of rennet, 9 milliliters of boiled water, and chilled after, and then you dilute it and you use one drop of this one into a test tube, and you will have probably to do some adjustments depending the milk and depending the rennet you use. But 1 drop of rennet in 3 of the tubes and nothing in the other 3 tubes. The 3 tubes with nothing in, so just the milk, no rennet, you will check the pH and or TA every 12 hours. The milk with the test tubes with milk and rennet, you will check the gel. What kind of gel? This created. In here, those are real measurements, real observations that have been done on the field. So we have 4 different profiles in here. We have the blue one. So here, the pH is not moving at all. Over 48 hours, there is no movement. So ideally, this is a target for a pasteurized milk. When we pasteurize the milk, we want it to be dead in a way. That we know that we start with a white page and we rebuild something like by adding all the magic powder that we can find in order to make it acidify the speed we want. The curve shouldn't move for 48 hours. That's really a sign that the milk has been properly heat treated. The red curve, it shows a very low acidification potential. It takes a long time to acidify on its own. This means that there is no self-protection against contaminants. This makes the use of lactic acid bacteria compulsory. You have to add starter culture into this milk. Next profile, the green profile, the green curve. It shows a very good early continuous acid development with a good self-protection. So it means that this milk has a population of lactic acid bacteria that is able to fight any kind of bad bugs. Remember, I'm talking about raw milk or pasteurized milk, right? I've seen pasteurized milk showing the violet curve that's lower in the first one. So the violet curve, we have very fast and strong acid development that gives a great self-protection, but this is also leads to a potential of over acid development in the cheese, particularly if you don't know what's going on into your milk and if you use the classic dose, the recommended dosage of starter culture. So in this case, you should really consider of not using starter culture or reducing seriously the quantity of starter culture. But that's the case also for the green curve. So if you want to know, because most of the time when you buy starter culture, they say, well, 1 sachet per 1,000 liters or 5 units per 100 liters. It's fine. But this is a recommended dosage for what we call a G milk, a reconstituted laboratory milk that's completely dead. And this dosage of 5 units per 100 liters, recommended by the supplier, is going to acidify with this type of milk. But if you think that you have a green type milk using the normal load of starter culture will make it way too acidic. So you will struggle to control the drainage, the texture. Well, all the cheese production will be affected by that. So when you start making cheese or starting to develop a recipe, that's the first parameter to do with the milk. Just let it acidify on its own. Is it able to do something? Then if yes, think of the quantity of starter culture that you need to use, more or less. The gel with the rennet, sorry. So the gel with the rennet, we just incubate it, and every 12 hours we look at it and we see and we'll record what it looks like. The first one is the homogeneous gel. That's dominant lactic fermentation. This is exactly what we want. We want to have the gel looking like a yogurt, coagulated, flat, good smell. That's it. Then we can have everything else. Spongy gel with bubbles. We have some gas being produced in. Depending the size of the holes and the smells, we can identify coliforms, yeast, heterofermentative bacteria, potentially butyrics as well, depending the temperature and the quantity of butyrics. Flaky gel with lot of whey, sign of excessive population of proteolytic bacteria like NS-lab, non-starter lactic acid bacteria. Can be Staphylococcus. It can be also some Pseudomonas as well. Often this is associated with a slimy whey in a kind of viscous. Another one will be the digested curd. Curd is very degraded and cloudy with potentially slimy whey in this case as well. And we can have a sign of excessive psychotrophic bacteria. Can be a very old milk that has been used. Very old milk or very populated in cold loving. By observing the gel every 12 hours, we can tell the speed of problem appearance. The sooner we observe the problem, the more dominant, strong the flora involved. Like gas, if you see coliforms, if you see that the gel after 48 hours, you get some coliforms and bubbles, you know that you have the problem, but the problem is not very dominant because within 48 hours, you will have time to acidify, drain, eventually salt the curd. This will limit the development will create hurdles for the development of coliforms. But if you see this problem showing up at 12 hours, in this case, it really means that it's very dominant. So whatever you will do in cheese making, you will very much be struggling with this problem, will be dominant. So timing can tell you what kind of dominance you have in the milk. Another test that's very similar to the lacto-fermentation, that's called the micro-curdling test or micro-coagulation. So this is a technique that has been developed by a group called Opsalim, and the founder is Bruno Giboudot, which is a vet specialized in dairy animals for cheese making. And so this technique relies on the fact that for many years, Bruno has been visiting farmers in Jura making Comté cheese, and a lot of them were feeding their calves with milk powder. And he was telling them, so why you produce a lot of milk from your cows, but you are feeding your calves with milk powder? So why that? And a lot of them were saying, well, when I feed my calves with milk, straight milk, they often have scours and diarrheas and problems. But they were selling their milk to the co-op to make cheese. So we're thinking, well, if it's not working for the calf, it's not going to work for the cheesemaker as well. Because what we do when we make milk into the cheese vat, so we bring milk, we inoculate it with bacteria. This is what the calf is doing with the mouth, the saliva, to inoculate the milk with bacteria into the abomasum. The abomasum is a big vat, big reservoir where enzyme will be injected, our rennet, at high temperature. Then the abomasum will break the curds to evacuate the whey first. This is what we do when we cut the curd and stir to eliminate the whey. So if it doesn't work for the calf, it's not going to work for the cheesemaker. So this technique that's normally used for calf, well, testing the milk for calf health, we use it for cheesemaking as well. So what we do is we take test tubes, the same test tubes as for the lacto-fermentations, and in some test tubes we will dilute the milk with demineralized water, boiled demineralized water, 10%, 25%, 50% of water into the milk. And this will be to try to challenge the milk to the coagulation. See, is this milk able to coagulate still diluted at 50% or even more? If so, it means that the curdling potential of the milk is fantastic. So take your milk, add 1 milliliter of rennet, single strength to each one, and incubate 24 hours at 38, 40 degrees. So we can use a baby bottle warmer the system just to keep it warm. That's very simple and very cheap to use. And then after 24 hours, we just look at what we can have. This is what we want. The target is a distinct spiral, clear whey, noticeable cream at the top. And the milk, the more we dilute, like 70% and 50% milk, still coagulate, still make a spiral that shows a neat edges, so some cream in, and clear whey. This is exactly what we are looking for. The aspect of the spiral in here really indicates the mineral balance. Calcium, phosphorus. Calcium coagulates the proteins, phosphorus contracts the curd. So by contracting, it twists the gel of curd. If so, the twist like that really indicates that we have a good ratio calcium phosphorus. We know how to play with the calcium in the milk. We just can add simply calcium chloride. Phosphorus, we don't know how to play with it because phosphorus is an explosive in contact with oxygen. So it's not a very safe product to give to cheesemakers, including me. And so phosphorus, if we don't have it in the milk, well, that's it. We have no ways of controlling it. We have different possibilities. The top one, the curd is very rubbery, tight spiral. We have excess of phosphorus or lack of calcium. So we have a mineral balance. We have a mineral balance problem in the animals. Something's wrong in the diet. The bottom one, globulus and clear whey. This one, there is a lack of minerals. The coagulation is not good. The contraction is not good. There is mineral problem as well, but we are losing it. We have a deficit of calcium and phosphorus. Very thin and resistant to dilution with a clear whey. This one indicates a lack of proteins. Excess of calcium in diet. We need to check the efficiency and intake of the ration. We always consider the feeding of the animals with numbers. Most of the time, the nutritional technicians that are often paid by the company that are selling you the grains or concentrates or soya and so on. So I'm very well, it only concerns me, but I always find it not objective. How do you advise properly a farmer if your business relies on selling more soya, more grains, more extra stuff, the magic powder that will make your cow making 10 times more milk? But if the milk is not good for cheese making, it means that there is something different. So most of the time, the system that we use to calculate the rations, the food for the animals, it's numbers on the laptop. We need to put this quantity of proteins, this quantity of energy, this quantity of fiber stuff. So we have different vocabulary in France and in here. So I'm not going to go too much into details, but there is a fundamental parameter that is not integrated into those softwares. It's the timing. The timing, when do you give this, when do you give that, how many times your cow or goat or sheep is ruminating per minute. And there are a lot of informations that are missed. It's not because you give 12 kilos of hay, 10 kilos of silage, and 5 kilos of corn that you click on the button on the software and it says, oh, that's the perfect ration for your animal, that it works. It's not a machine, it's an animal. And we need to also remember that we are not feeding the cow, the sheep, or the goat. We are feeding the abomasum. The abomasum is feeding the animal. And this is always a concept that is completely forgotten about it. We don't feed the cow, we feed the abomasum feed the cow. So if you make a mistake with the moment, with the quantity, with the type of food, well, yeah, your animal will be producing milk, because they don't tell you, no, I feel sick today, I don't produce milk, sorry. It's much more subtle than that, but I'm not going to develop too much about it. So all those test tubes showing strange cloudy way, bubbly, in here we have some bubbles, we have microbiological contaminations, some more weak gel, very cloudy. This one, if you get this curd in here, if this is what you produce, yes, the milk at the beginning, when you get the milk, is white, is beautiful. It's beautiful milk. But when you start to challenge it, if it makes this kind of curd in here, well, you should go fishing. Don't try to make cheese with it, because it will be a disaster in terms of quality, in terms of quantity. You will waste your time trying to do something in the cheese vat. It's not the magic powder, the starter culture. You can be the best cheesemaker on the world. If you have milk that only can do that when you coagulate it, what do? Well, you go fishing. That's the best way. You join Jenny on Murray and you go fishing with her. Last parameter that we can easily check is the pH and TA. Most of the cheesemakers, they only use pH. Very, very few in Australia use TA. That's something that is not really popular in here. It's two different techniques. The pH measure the hydrogen potential, while the TA measure the liquid acids that we have in the milk. So that's two different techniques. It's not one or the other, because both of them will tell you two different parameters. If we look at cow classic values, a pH for the cow is between 6.6 and 6.8. A normal TA value is between 14 and 18 Dornick degrees, which is 0.14% lactic acid or 0.18% lactic acid. Just divide by 100. Sorry. Sheep classic value 6.4 to 6.8 with a TA higher, 16 to 22. Goat 6.5 to 6.8 with the lower TA value, 13 to 18. The TA integrates the quantity of proteins that you have in the milk. So with the fresh milk and high proteins, your milk will always read a lower value, a higher TA value. If the milk is lower in proteins, you will have a lower value. So now, at the moment, this is what I've done this morning. Few months ago, my milk in here was a classic of 6.75 and 17 Dornick, 16.5, 17. And now for a few weeks, it's down to 15 and it's going to collapse a bit more down to 14. I'm expecting it to be down to 14. So it means that my pH stays the same, but the TA is moving downwards. So we know now that the milk composition, I don't have to ring the farmer. I know that the milk quantity, the protein quantity in the milk is collapsing. That's due to the weather, the hot weather, the season, the climate. We know that. We know that we have a lower protein value. Lower protein value means less buffer power. So we reduce the quantity of starter culture. It means also less yield, less protein, less solid into the milk. So we need to drain a little bit more the curd in the vat. So now with this indicator of knowing that I have a lower TA with a normal pH, I've been using less starter culture, and I've been stirring 5 minutes more my curd in the vat to compensate the fact that the milk is getting lower in solids. So just understanding how those guys works, pH and TA works together, gives us some indicators of what should we do. Like a fresh milk 6.5 to 6.8 with 16 TA. If we have a pH greater than 6.9 and a very low TA, this means few different options. Mastitis. It can be water addition into the milk, detergent residue, particularly soda, caustic into the milk. The caustic will destroy the proteins, so the TA goes down, and the caustic is very high in pH, so the pH goes up. Psychotrophic bacteria like Pseudomonas, this one eats the proteins, so TA goes down, and release ammonia into the milk. That's an alkaline, so pH goes up. So depending how those guys move together, if the pH is low and the TA is higher than normal, so pH lower than normal, TA higher than normal, we can suspect bacteria development, so cold chain breakdown, milk that started to acidify. Remember, do not pasteurize the milk that is acidic. This milk in here at 6.3, 6.4, it might coagulate into the pasteurizer. So check it with the boil test in the saucepan. TA 19, 20, 22. If you have a normal pH with a high TA, this is very rich milk in caseins. This is the classic milk that I used to have in France with my Jersey cows. My Jersey cows used to have a 6.7, 6.75 pH, but a 22 TA was a common value. The average quantity of proteins that we had in milk was 42 to 44 grams per liter. So it's 4.2, 4.4% proteins and 7.5% fat. So this value, a high TA and normal pH, was a common value for us. Now with the milk that we are buying in here, we have a common value of 16 and 6.7, 6.75. Normal pH, but with the lower value of TA, this is a sign of low proteins, low nitrogen. Right? So just by assessing pH and TA, pH in here. So here we have normal, normal, normal. The pH itself doesn't tell us anything. But if we compare it with the TA, the first case we have a normal milk. This one we have very rich milk in caseins. Rich milk in caseins, more buffer power, so we should use more starter culture, more solids, so less drainage needed for during the cheese making. So we start to be able to adjust the cheese making process that we have. And of course, when the milk is very poor, that's the opposite. We should use less starter culture and we should use more process during the drainage. We should emphasize on the drainage parameter. I think it's time for questions.
Wow, thanks, Yvonne. That was very good. So if we go back up to your questions, there was, I'm not sure if you answered Sharon's question about, do you mean the pasteurization should be done at the lowest temperature possible?
Yeah, so yes, I answered that one.
Yeah,
and yes,
okay.
particularly for hard and semi-hard cheese. Yes. The softer the cheese, the less important it is. And I would say even for the lactics and therefore yogurt, you can pasteurize at much higher parameters because this will help you to solubilize the whey protein. So this will increase the yield. But don't do that for cheese that you need a lot of rennet to coagulate, like semi-hard cheese and hard cheese.
Okay, so then I think she said, or do you mean it should be stored in the vat as raw milk at the lowest temperature?
No, it's about the pasteurization.
Yeah, good. Okay.
The biggest enemy of the the raw milk, the artisan milk, is the long and cold storage. That's terrible for the milk quality. What's the risk level of bacteriophage getting to cheese factories through milk as a vector? So that's possible, but considering that if you pasteurize, this risk is eliminated because viruses, the bacteriophage, are very, very sensitive to heat treatment. So well, I've never seen a problem coming from milk being pasteurized. It's much more a process problem with whey, the drains and the bins as well. The classic source is the bin when you put your empty bags of starter culture, that it stays in the bin for a couple of days. The bacteriophage, they multiply in the empty bag of starter culture. They are food in, so they multiply. And then when you open the bin, you have billions of phage that are moving with the air movement, and then you contaminate everything. You have it into the whey, you have it into the drains, every pound of whey, stagnant whey, water. So whey on the floor is a big no-no for bacteriophage control.
Right.
And hopefully this is not too off topics, but there is a Danish company called Larcher that has developed a commercial scale alternative to thermal pasteurization that uses filtered UV to treat milk and other dairy streams. In Australia, high pressure processing of milk has been approved as an alternative to thermal treatment. So I don't know the filtered UV system, but what I understand with the UV is that it works well if there is no particles. To like in the water, you must have a very good particle filter, very fine filter, because every particle will permit the bacteria to hide the other side, and the UV will not work. So if it's the case in the water, I don't understand how this would work in the milk, considering that all the proteins and fat and everything will prevent the connection between the UV ray and the bacteria. So I need to investigate a lot more. But my first thought is I'm suspicious with that. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Regarding the high pressure process, um, unfortunately, for a small and medium units, that requires equipment that's only can be done only in batches. So that's not a continuous system. So it's not very efficient for the medium and larger size. For small units, well, I don't know if the investment of this high pressure system makes it well, either affordable and easy to justify in terms of cost. I think the best option is to have a common work on the milk quality from the beginning, to develop the best milk and milking practices for feed, for the cow, animal welfare, so that we can all together prove to the Australian government that raw milk can be produced in a safe way. But instead of trying to find alternative techniques or methods or things, no, make sure that you have fantastic quality milk from the beginning, and then it should be the best. Well, for me, it's the best way. Would you recommend adding calcium chloride when using 2 days old milk and higher pasteurization procedure? Completely. You should, in my opinion, you should use calcium chloride if your milk is more than 36 hours old, if you pasteurize the milk, and if the milk has been stored at cold temperature. So in any case, if it's more than 36 hours old, it has to be chilled. So in any case, you are losing calcium available into the cheese. On top of that, if you pasteurize the milk, yeah, 50% of the calcium available is gone as a calcium triphosphate. So that's the milk stone. And as a milk stone, the crystal makes the calcium not available. So after pasteurization, you should add back some calcium, dosage between 5 and 20 grams per 100 liter, and to be added as soon as possible after pasteurization when the milk is lower than 45 degrees C. You need at least an hour between calcium addition and rennet to make sure that this is efficient. And other question, what are the processing raw material quality parameters that we have to meet to prevent collapse of soft ripened cheese during maturation? That's the moisture level of your cheese. That's not, for me, my understanding, it's not a milk problem. It's the composition of the cheese. So if I understand well, we have the cheese that collapse completely during the aging. It's because the cheese is lacking structure and texture to hold the body. So either you have way too much water trapped into the cheese, and this permits an excess, well, the cheese is too moist, so it collapses, or you have excessive proteolytic but strains like penicillium, like bacteria, a classic starter culture like MM100. If you have too much of them, it's a proteolytic bomb. It works too fast, too strong in the texture. So the texture become oozy and liquid.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. Yeah, I've just put in a webinar feedback link, and I'll also email that to you following the webinar. And I hope you're all able to join us again in 2021, including you, Yvonne, but I haven't spoken to you about that yet.
Yep.
Look, thank you so much for attending today. Thank you, Yvonne, for all that hard work you've put into this. And I guess if you want to talk further about butyric acid, maybe you can chat to Carla, and maybe that's a topic for another webinar. Who knows?
Yeah, completely. Completely.
All right, then. We've just run a little bit over time, but we're getting thank yous there. And look, it's a pleasure for Dairy Australia to be able to provide this service. And if you have new topics you'd like to hear, we always welcome them. So thank you very much. Yvonne, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Bye.
then. Yep, bye.